Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone here. This is the first lecture of the Mount Gretna School of Art summer lecture series. Our students just arrived Sunday. So this is the first big startup week and everybody seems great. And I just wanted to say that the Arts for All partnership of the Foundation for Enhancing Communities gave us a grant to help keep our Zoom audience after we did everything in Zoom last year. So even though we're back to in-person lectures again here, I want to thank them for that grant. And now I'm going to move on to introducing Anki. And I was looking at your resume, and I think some of this you're going to have to explain to me, but you studied in Norway. You're from Norway. You got both your BFA and MFA equivalent. I'm not going to try to pronounce the schools. And then you also did some studies at the Art Students League in New York, where you've done some teaching, and she's brought some of those workshops experiences here for the students to study with her tomorrow. Lots of shows. Kafka on the Shore at Peep Show Space, and where's that?
Well, that actually just ended. I can tell you that I did update my website. But the greatest news is last night I had an opening at the Painting Center in New York. Yeah,
so that runs from June 22nd to July 17th. I'm gonna let Anki handle the rest.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jay, for inviting me. And it's good to see some faces I know from before. John Mitchell, my partner, and I were here a few years ago and did crits. So we met some of you then. And it's really fun to be back. But yes, so I grew up in Norway, as Jay said, and came to New York when I was, I guess, roughly your age. Well, I could start this by pointing out where Norway is. I know it's far away and small, so not all of you might know. It's way up there in the north. It's a pretty small country. I think it's like same size as the state of New Mexico or something like that. And we have, it's only 5 million people in the whole country. So somebody said, like, there's so few few Norwegians in New York. And I said, well, there's few Norwegians everywhere. There's not a whole lot of us. So this is the town I grew up in. It's a little sawmill town, about an hour north of Oslo. So there are a couple of thousand people in the forest is usually what I say. Which is a lovely place to grow up, and like here, just lots of nature and, very beautiful. So when I came to New York, I had already 5 years of art school behind me. And I was just telling somebody over here where I did never understand the American school system. I still kind of don't. But I happened to walk by the Art Students League one day and they said, you can start tomorrow. And I'm like, sounds good to me. Classes are affordable and I can pick my own teacher. I don't get stuck with somebody I don't like. And so I was like, I'll do that. So I have pretty classical training from my school days. These were some of my first, I would say last actual portrait paintings. When I did 2 of these paintings in a row that came up exactly the way I wanted them to, I was like, okay, I got the skill now. Now I have to figure out what to do with it. And I went to an abstract painting class and I sat around and scratched my head for about 3 weeks. And I'm like, I have no idea what to do. How do I decide? So I was walking around the city and I saw a lot of these, men in suits. And I started doing a series with gray men. And all the color in their lives are either a little red sports car and one is holding a Barbie doll. They're holding hands, obviously going to work and that kind of stuff. But then I just found it too hard to pull imagery for just out of myself at that point. So I started taking a lot of pictures around the city. A lot of, I was young, I went to parties, so there were a lot of party pictures, and I used that as my inspiration. Got double the fun, So as you can see, I stopped kind of making them look very realistic. I didn't want them to look like photographs. I wanted the paintings to have texture and be really painterly. And I was and am super just into paint. Like, I think paint is just like the awesomest, yummiest, fun thing. And I love using it. And that's why I'm going to squeeze out a bunch of paint tomorrow and we'll have some fun with it for the workshop. So, so these were the paintings I did for several years. Very like textural, rugged, but from photographs. And I never really took photographs to paint from. I just took a ton of pictures. And this was back in the day when you actually had to like get your film developed and stuff. So it was somewhat costly, but I just took a bunch of pictures, and then I would just look through them and see if I could find something that seemed to inspire me. And, I could find like a teeny tiny piece in a picture, like a little, and I'm like, I'll make that a painting. That's, I just needed a little bit of inspiration to get me going. Little sketch kind of. So these are, my sister ended up being in some of these paintings. That was her in the previous painting as well as in this one. And one thing that I was a little bit like shell-shocked by when I moved to New York were homeless people on the street. I'd never seen that before. That kind of just didn't exist in Norway. So I was really intimidated, but I started taking pictures of them, and then I didn't have a zoom on my camera, so I needed to go up and talk to them to get the pictures. And I had this experience. It was really funny. No matter how like drugged out, drunk, whatever these poor people were, once I had like talked to them, I said I was an artist, I could take their picture, I'd give them $1. No matter what, once I pulled out that camera, they would sit up and go. And I'm like, it was really interesting because we are like how culturally like trained we are to react that way to a camera. So this is maybe the beginning of where I started making double paintings. So I had made this painting, which was, more realistic. And then from that painting, I made this painting, which was a lot more abstract. And it led me into a series of works called Faceless, where these people become faceless to us. We don't see them. They lose face to the world. So I worked on that and I started removing their faces. And if any of you guys have questions as we're going, feel free to ask. I'll repeat to the camera so they can hear the question. Okay, so first big change in my life. I had come to New York. I met an American musician in art school in Norway. He was the reason I came over to New York. And had a fairly tumultuous relationship there, but then I got divorced and I was by myself in New York. And of course, these big life events influences your work because you are the painter. So whatever you go through will show up in your work. So instead of photographing people outside of myself, I started photographing me and working from those pictures. And I also switched medium and I switched palette. I started painting in acrylic because I really had some stuff that needed to come out really fast and I couldn't do that the way I wanted to in oil. So I switched to acrylic. And then my palette got super limited. I think I was working with like 7 colors, like a earthy red, yellow, brown, black, white, pretty much. And thinking about it, that was nothing I decided, I think most of you probably start feeling that way about when you do things. You're kind of just like feeling your way into things. So even though I felt very lost at this time, I made myself some pretty tight rules that I was going to work in, and I made these paintings called Searching, which is then obviously also searching for myself because I had sort of lost myself during a few years and needed to find myself again. And doing these, and these were pretty big paintings, like you see 78 by 40. And I can do them fast working with acrylic. And I, again, used photograph as my like sketch, but I stretched and moved and like started distorting the imagery a lot more. So that is the first big like change in my work. This was the last of those paintings that I did from photographs of myself. And at that point I was kind of like, all right, I'm ready for the world, come what may, I'm here. And that's when I went through the other really large change in my work, when I stopped using reference material. And to me, that's probably the hardest thing still to this day that I'm doing, is trying to pull whatever imagery, what comes out in the painting is just, you pull it from somewhere. You don't know what's going to happen. It's, how do you know if something's right or wrong when you have no reference of anything? And it's always a challenge, but a really good challenge. So this was one of the first paintings I did with no reference material. And this was based on the story, probably twice removed from me, where somebody had gone to like ladies' swim night in Williamsburg. And they said when they had walked into the wardrobe, it was full of like dark clothing and wigs. And then in the pool, there were all these women swimming in colorful dresses, and they were all bald. And I was like, wow, that's like some really powerful imagery. And I started out this painting with like 4 or 5 people in the pool, and then started painting over and went back, and eventually it was this one lady swimming in the pool with this big dress on. So I was really proud of this painting, and it actually is in a museum. So then I started painting these figures, and these have followed me ever since. And of course, they're somewhat referring to myself, but I'm not looking at anything when I do this. But of course, you can see my training, with figures and stuff. I can paint a figure. And this one, I just realized when I was looking at the slides earlier that it looks a lot like this one. But I never thought about that till just now. I was like, oh, this one I did from a photograph, this one I didn't. And I did like the red hands and the head, thinking a little bit about like where creativity lives, it's kind of there, but obviously it's also like the heart and the center, but it just looked good this way. So that's what it ended up being. And ever since then, I've just been working out of my head. For many years, I felt like I had a slide machine in my head where like images would pop in and I would just do them. In the last few years, that has stopped happening. So I was freaked out for a long time, but I figured out a way eventually. This was actually a painting I did after I had a school class visiting, and somebody said, why do you only paint women? And I was like, I do? I never thought about that. And I was like, yeah, I guess I do. Then I was like, I'm going to paint a man. And so I was like standing there painting, and I was like, how does a man hold his arms? And all I could think about was like, the muscle man kind of thing. So I started doing that. And then as I was working, I realized, oh, I can't paint a man because I feel myself and feel, my physical being when I paint, and I don't know what it feels like to be a man. So that doesn't work. So I started painting this woman right in the middle of the painting, but the arms got left from the man. So I don't know if she's stuck in those arms or put them on, to be more powerful, but that's what happened with that painting. And this painting, this gray palette really just seeped into my work and has been something I've been pretty much using for the last, 20 years or something. But I also couldn't figure out why I didn't use more color. That was like a shocker to me. I was like, what's wrong with me? I'm a painter and I'm like not using color. And then I figured out slowly that I'm just super sensitive to color. Too much color totally overwhelms me. And you'll see on some of these later slides that I often start out with tons of color and then I paint over just about all of it till I can sort of handle it. To me, it almost feels like meeting somebody with way too much like makeup and stuff and jewelry and things. And you're just like, who are you? Can you take that off? Like I need to get to who, to the being behind all of that. And that's what my paintings feel like. And I just need to get to the basic. What is this really about? And, you know, growing up with these colors being we saw last 5 months of the year, you can see why my palette maybe ended up being in that area. So to me, it has a lot to do both the textural part of how I work and the colors. For me, are still very related to the nature where I grew up, even though I don't paint nature particularly, but I still feel so connected to the nature there. I think you can sort of see that here. Then I went to another little shift where I remember so little from my childhood and my sister remembers everything. So it was like, call her to like, is there something with this or that? Like, and she's like, oh yeah, here's the story. And I was like, I want to remember more. So I started making, these are smaller paintings. And I started making a lot of these paintings, just trying to pull from memories and see if I could like get more out of this childhood thing. I'm sure if John was here, he was going to make me tell the story behind this painting. And it's really kind of embarrassing, but I'm going to tell it anyway, because it is what we do in Norway. So yeah, growing up kind of a nature child. In Norway, the ants build really big ant hills out of pine needles. So they're everywhere in the forest. Like they got to get up to like 4 or 5 feet tall, like huge ant hills. But most of them are a little bit smaller. And how the ants protect themselves in Norway is they spritz like an acid on any intruder that wants to stick their nose in the anthill. They all stick their little bottoms up and they spritz this like acid out. And I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if kids still do it, but in the spring, the pussy willow tree grows really long branches, and we would peel off the bark, and what you get then is a really sappy, sweet stick. And then we would slap the anthill, and they would spritz it with their acid, and then we would chew on it, and it's like sweet tarts. And I made John try it. And he's like, yeah, it tastes like sweet tarts. Like, I told you so. So this is, my memory of the anthill, the sticks, and and then we would get sores on the edges of our mouth because we would chew on these sticks. Weird things in the forest, yeah. This was another memory when I was mad at the neighbor and I buried his car keys and we never found them again. You can make good paintings out of really weird stories. This is, I did also a series with me and my sister. She's 5 years younger, and in many ways I feel like I defined myself as a person against her. Sadly for her many times, but I tested a lot of things about myself out probably on her, like how far can we push this? Can you, can I make you do this? When will you say no? I had to, so poor girl. But so I did a lot of these paintings called Sisters. Without her, I don't think I would be who I am. So she's very important to me. Here's another large painting. Again, these figures, this one is starting to wrap up, and you'll see that more in some of these. I don't know if I have a lot of slides of these, but a lot of my later paintings, you'll see have the figures are covered, and they just started doing that. And I talked to them, lately. It seems like they might start uncovering again a little bit. I have a couple of paintings now that they've undressed again. And I'm like asking them, like, are you done with this yet? Can we do other stuff now? But this is a painting called In Lines. And I always want to do more abstract stuff, and these figures just always show up in my work, and I can't like get rid of them. So I merge abstract things into the paintings, just the way they are. So this figure is obviously trying to be more of an abstract shape or something, but not quite succeeding. But these lines also, again, refer so much to the nature where I grew up, like where we have these lots of tall trees that are super straight. It's not like here where you have all these leafy, curly, strange looking trees. Like our trees are just like straight up and down, straight up and down. And I think that's probably also why I love doing these figures straight up and down, right in the middle of the painting, like totally ignoring all the composition rules and all that. So this is a figure, again, I guess, trying to be a tree, trying to be out there in the world, also inspired by, now I can't remember her name, but the nymph that got turned into a tree when Daphne, yeah, thank you. When this ungodly god was, chasing her all over, and she's like, let it stop. And her father was like, sure, and turned her into a tree. I don't know if that was such a good solution, but maybe you could turn the guy into a tree instead. Anyway, so this is a painting that I thought I had finished. I had photographed it. I had put it away. And then this happens a lot to me when I realize I don't send these images to anybody. Like the painting is not moving out of its JPEG state to go visit anybody. I'm like, it's not quite done yet. So then, I also have to let myself get lost in these paintings. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I have to try every which way. Like, if this doesn't work, that maybe work. Try this, try that. This is a light background, maybe it needs a dark background, so eventually turned into this instead. And I can't say why I know that this is done and this is good compared to the other one, but this just felt like now it was done. So this is the beginning of a painting. This was also funny. We had I wasn't there, but John had a studio visit, and they looked in my studio at, a bunch of the stuff you've now seen. And then this was hanging on the wall because I had started it, and they were like, that's really good. And I was like, well, yeah, that's how my paintings start. That's not how they end up. So I'm like, that's what that painting ended up being, which is a lot more colorful than most of my paintings, but it's still very different from, this crazy wild color thing. I often use just my leftover paint on the palette, stick it all over the canvas, and then I'll start drawing and doing things, which is the way I've slowly found my way now that I'm not getting images anymore, to get something on the canvas anyway. I'll just start drawing things or putting colors on, and then I'll start seeing things, and I'll move towards that and see if there's something there. This is a strange shape, a painting that I had for a while in my head. And I had done a couple of drawings, and I did this painting. And again, I was like, it's just not quite what I wanted. It's almost there, but not quite. So instead of painting over this painting, I took a new canvas and I made this instead. And this one I like a lot more. So sometimes I'll pull a painting back out and redo it, and sometimes maybe I'll just do another one. So I think probably I spent so much time on that one that I was like, I'm just going to do a new one. And this one then happened a lot faster because I already had sort of a grip on the imagery I wanted in it. And this was another one of those paintings that I thought it was done, but it wasn't quite there. It was sitting around, and then nope. And then I pulled it back out and I went at it again, and it changed to this. So you can see the figure sort of stayed, but obviously a totally different painting. More simple, But this one I have shown several times, so happy with this one. It's hard to see in this, but well, actually you see it better on the screen. But this one has, at that time, as much color as I could handle. Like, this was like crazy colorful to me. There's just like little specks of color coming through here and there. I was like, ooh, me being crazy. And then there's other weird things that happened. This was in my sketchbook, and I knew this was there, and I'm so glad I found it again to pull this out. So I did this drawing in 1996, a couple of years after I moved to New York. And this imagery has been with me for a long time, like these wrapped up bodies. And I've been thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And then in 2016, the painting finally happened. Like, that was one long digestion of an idea, but I couldn't figure out how to do it till then. And this is a very textural, very rugged, painting. So then I want to just show some progress images. This is 3 paintings, and this was actually like one of the few times I had an idea. I very rarely do. I think ideas are tied to verbal things, and we're, of course, in school and stuff. Like we are taught that everything has to be explained verbally about everything. Like, you have to explain it, you have to tell the stories. And for me, painting is not that at all. So I always have to like find some stories. And I talk to many painters who do this. Like, you just make up stuff afterwards to like have some verbal stuff to go with it, because who knows, So I had this idea, and I think it was after teaching for a while, and I wanted to make a red and a blue and a yellow figure, and they were going to be my primary people. Like, also, what is a primary person? Like the base of us, the basic, like colors are. And so you can see I started out with this blue and brown and red background, and then had some I was like, maybe it's yellow, it's kind of like gold, it's kind of like the sun, maybe it's like shining, trying different things. So you see some progression there. And then this is the final painting when it was done. So very simplified. I kept some of the red on the bottom, but otherwise it got pretty much just yellow and white. You can still sort of feel like a little bit of the ray thing, but it's not like in your face. This was my red figure, tried a bunch of things, you just get lost. You find your way again, you get lost again. So I started out with all kinds of different colors. Then I tried to do this like aura thing, or like emitting light. That kind of didn't work. And then it became a black hole instead. And eventually it just became just paint, really. It has some red sort of, not slashes, but like red paint pieces around it. And then I just threw in the blue one. I didn't do a lot of progression images, but it has like little snowflakes around it. So those are my primary people. Those are also pretty big, 94 by 72. And then lately, so these are much newer. So these are my super weirdo characters that have been showing up lately. Covered, as you see, but this one ended up having a whole lot of arms. I do a lot of arms separate from the figure, and then a lot of figures without arms. And I've been thinking a lot about that too, and think I figured out that it has to do somewhat with the word to do for me, that I want to do things, or I can't do things, or I wish I could do things. And that sort of, the figure gets affected by that, and either has arms or doesn't have arms, or just arms hanging around by themselves. This one just got a lot of arms, so maybe it's able to do a lot of stuff. I don't know. But somebody said it looks like corn on the cob too. I don't know. I was just having fun playing with texture here, and like doing little like things and the yellow, and having fun with it. But now you can see like people who had known me then for a long time have been shocked coming into my studio in the last few years. Like they're like, there's color. I'm like, I know, it's pretty crazy. If you go to New York and go to the Painting Center, this one is up there right now. And there is a documentary, which you might have to pay for, called Artists in New York City. It was on Amazon. I think it's going to come out via like some PBS connection, but it's on Vimeo. And I'm painting, I'm one of the artists in it. There's like 20 artists in the documentary, but I'm painting this, and it's very different at that point. The background is like pinkish brown with like big rocks. It was like a stone wall behind it, and I'm also working on some of the feathers, which is like I wanted to make feathers, and I you know, sometimes you just do things and you're like, how did I know how to do that? I went and I bought feathers. And then I had painted a white background, and I stuck the feather there, and I slapped lots of black paint over it. And then I pulled the feather off, and then I just finished painting around it like extra, and it totally works. It looks very much, you know, like the feathers. And I'm like, I don't know how I knew to do that, but it worked. And this is, this is one of the few like images that have popped into my head. And I'm like, how in the world, like my head must be so weird for an image like this to be like, I did a little sketch on the subway one day, and I was like, this is the painting. Like it has 3 figures that are standing under what looks to be a grass carpet. And then people ask, you know, what is this painting about? And I'm like, I better have some school classes over who can tell me what they think about it so that I can have some stuff to say about it. Because that's, you know, oftentimes when people like you see it, they're like, this makes me think of, and I'm like, that's great, good done. Take that out. Yeah, in some ways, like I'll feel what it is, but those feelings don't have verbal things to go with them. So I can't squeeze it into words. When I try to do that, I feel like I'm trying to take something that's so vast and like squish it into like little words. It just doesn't work. My sister saw this and she's like, oh, that's us again. And I was like, I didn't think about that, but yeah, I guess, you know, it's these 2 characters being connected in many ways. And it's hard to say if it's like a pushing down or lifting up thing, which is often the way relationships work. They're a little bit of both, right? And then this is another progression of a painting. So again, I had no idea where I'm going. I'm getting totally lost. I had this, like, you know, feeling like there's going to be some movement. I like this fan idea, and it had this ball, but then I think it had legs initially, and then the ball came in, but I didn't take pictures at the very beginning. And then that kept going for a while through different, and then that got lost, and then it changed again, and then the head became one of the fans. And then I didn't like that so much, so then I painted that out or scraped it out and tried something else and moved through, and then that's what the painting ended up being in the end. So a lot of this, like, you just have to let yourself, you know, make all the mistakes and go all the wrong ways and let yourself be lost. And eventually, you know, you'll find things on your way that you will not have otherwise. I find that every time I think I'm going to like make a decision and do something that I decide, it just always falls so flat. It just, there's no discovery there. There's no finding. So it just becomes very boring. So I had to let myself go on these journeys. And sometimes it's super frustrating and I'm taken down roads I don't want to go. And something I've had to actually battle a little bit and eventually find acceptance in is that these are the paintings that come out of me. I didn't choose to paint this way, but when I left all reference material, these are the images that came up, and this is what comes out. And like my mom is like, why don't you paint pretty paintings that people would want to buy? like I can't, because this is what happens when I paint. And that came out a lot of times last night when at the opening, where people were like asking, again for meaning, or and I'm like, it's just what happens when I paint. I don't know what to say. Strange characters. And then I'll just have a few images at the end here of some of the sculptures that I've done since 2010 was the first one I did. And I was at a residency, Virginia, BCCA. And like now we had, the artists did presentations, and there was also some musicians there and writers. And one of the musicians played a piece of music, and I closed my eyes and I just saw this figure weaving itself like in my head. And the next day I just got some stuff for armature and went out there in the forest and started pulling down all these branches that I would drag back to the studio. And people are like, what are you nesting? And so I built this sculpture there, and it sat there. It lasted for about a year. So I had some pictures of it in the winter too. I didn't put those in here, but I was really happy with and I've never made anything like that before, but I've made many since. This is a larger one that was in this is a greenhouse that, many years ago was left abandoned. And so all the glass is gone, but it looks like a huge like whale, bone thing. And they do art exhibits in there. Well, it has to be things that can stay outside. But so I did this installation there. It's at Lynchburg. I did two in Pelham in 2017. This was in a new park that had just opened. So this is almost 9 feet, 96 inches tall. And so I had to get up on a ladder and do things and fill up the car again and again with all, tons of branches. And I go and often get the like invasive things that grow around and smother other trees. So people are really happy that I go and pull it out of their trees. And I was like, I'm going to get this, I'm going to save the tree and get this material. And I have to use the material while it's still very fresh. So I can't like get it a lot of time ahead, and because I need to use it while it's still pliable. And then it dries and it stays pretty much in place. So this became a different, again, because there was no, after I had said yes to doing this, I found out that I couldn't dig down here. So I couldn't get a base down in the ground to hold it up. So I had to make a base just sitting on top of the deck there. And then, of course, the figure got a dress and became some, got a cape too, so it became a little bit of a superhero in there. And then that is at an art center, and they have kids classes there, and the kids would do different things and like decorate the figure. There's some really cool things that they did with it. So that was there for also over a year. So it's also had snow and things. Yeah, then I'm hoping you guys have some questions. I figured, I'm going to do all the other art teachers a favor and let's put the bar low and start.
Anki, these sculptures really have the same as your paintings?
Pretty much. I mean, I either have made or get it made like an armature. I've been getting like rebar armatures that are super simple, just like a couple of crossbars, little square for a head. And then I get that placed, and I need to know where I'm putting it so I know what kind of base to put on it. But I need to dig down and pour a bunch of cement and stick it in there. But then once it happens, like how can you even plan? I don't even know what materials I'm going to really find, in the first place. So I just go out there in forest and find a bunch of stuff and start building. And I tie on the first 2 or 3 pieces, just to like stick them to the armature. And after that, it's all just the materials themselves. So of course you get really messed up hands, but it's just weaving it into itself, and it all just holds itself in place. But they're not meant to last forever, obviously. They last for about 2 years when they're sitting outside. I had one up in a place called a town, and it's a pretty rough town, and they had just like made this nice little park in town and invited several artists to do work. And I guess some person was really mad that I couldn't get into the building next door at some point, and kind of drunk, and he burnt my figure down. It had been up for a year, so I was like, it's fine, but I wish somebody would have filmed it. Huh? Yeah. So maybe they could start a new Burning Woman festival there. That'd be cool. Yeah, they're fun to do. It still feels very similar to me in many ways, making the paintings, like texture, building,
So you said primarily now your images are not.
Yeah, and now that I don't get the images anymore, I pretty much just start putting paint down. Like I use the leftovers of my palette, which often is way more colorful than you would think. And then I'll start drawing some lines on top of it. And then maybe that looks like maybe there's a figure leaning this way or that way. Or maybe I'll start drawing something that looks like that and see if that kind of feels right. I just sit and look at the canvas a lot, and sometimes I'll kind of just start seeing things being there, depending on the shape of it often. Like I have one in the painting center. It's a long painting. It has 3 figures. And some asked me like, why are there 3 figures in it? And I was like, that's what fit, because that was the size of the canvas. It was like the leftover end on a roll. And it was just like, that wide, but it was this sides of, so I gessoed it, I put it on the wall, and I was like, that looks like 3 figures are going to fit there. And so that's my reasoning for doing that. Yeah. And then I just play with the material. Like, again, I just love paint so much. Like the layering and the scraping and what you find as you're messing up with all kinds of things in the paint, and what you find as you let yourself get lost is a lot of fun. Yeah.
Do you feel like creating sculptures in this influenced your painting?
Not really. I feel like the sculptures it doesn't feel like a back and forth. It just feels like a different medium to do the same thing in. So the figures still happen. It like I said, that's what happens when I paint. This is what happens when you give me this material. I just make these figures, and I always just love the figure. I love paintings with figures in them. I also love a lot of abstract work, but I love the texture of paint. I like what paint can do, all the fun things and yummy things, Like I see a really like juicy painting, I like drool and my hands get itchy and I get all like, Yeah, and the material I use in the sculpture just really makes me be able to grab onto that. Like you can't do that quite with paint, but this feels like it's kind of like the same thing, but I can really grab onto this and move it around in different ways. Yeah.
When the painting is evolving, do you dialogue with anyone about it, or is it just a personal conversation?
I would say it's a dialogue, but it's between me and the painting. Not so much with anybody else, but I do something and then the painting will respond, yes, that worked, no, that didn't, you gotta try that again, and then I've always said that it feels like a dialogue. Like the painting tells me, and I do something, I try something that the painting didn't tell me, and then the painting says, no, that didn't work, or maybe like, oh, okay, that's okay. So yeah, it feels like a back and forth very much. But yeah, just between the flat surface and me.
Do you work on more than one painting at a time?
Usually, yes. And if I had a bigger studio, I'm in Brooklyn and, space is expensive, I would work on definitely more paintings at a time. But I can have about 2 going now. I have not the biggest studio, but I do big paintings. So I'll do one, I'll move it over to the side and start another one. And then I keep working on that one. And then I sit with some small pieces in my hand in between. Just with the small paintings, I can't fit much in them. They're small. But I can tell you something, an experience that I've had during COVID quickly. I couldn't paint. And I was like, what's going on? This is not good, but I can't paint. And so I would sit on my floor and I would draw and do things and inks and different charcoals and materials. And then I would try to get up and paint. I was like, I can't paint. And then I realized I use my body so much. Painting is very physical to me. I need to be like open and feel like I'm there with, all of me. I always said, like, what's more intimate, being with, this big painting with my whole body, or just sitting with something small in my hand, like more intimate to be with the whole painting, right? So I couldn't be that. I was too uptight. I had too much anxiety in my body, and I just wanted to sort of sit on the floor, kind of curled up, and do my drawings and feel like very protected. And that was one of those, like, wow, that's what's going on. Like, I can't physically make myself paint because it's too, but now I can paint again. So.
Do you ever try to return to reference photos and see how your paintings might react?
That's a good question. If I've returned to reference photos ever or thought about that. I have thought about it lately, especially since I'm not getting imagery anymore. There has been times where I see other people do it and they do so much cool stuff, and you can take different ones and put them together. And, I'm like, I feel like I could do that. But I haven't gotten, I often take pictures myself too, thinking that I'm going to use them for something. But what happens is it's my memory of those pictures that end up being something in my paintings. That might happen still, but I haven't found a way to look at something again and use that. But if I've seen the picture, or I have it in my phone, or, my memory of it sometimes makes itself into the paintings.
I think I've always found your work really intriguing since I first saw it. And as you were talking about occupying space, it really hit me that on one hand, you've got this very textural work, which brings it right to the forefront space-wise. But your work has volume and there's depth to it.
People talk about composition so much, and I'm like, you can have all of your painting on one side and put a red dot on the other side, and you have balance. Like, it's hard to know how important composition is to make something interesting, because you can do it with a paint stroke, just one brush stroke. You have totally different composition. So I think I work more, like you said, in depth rather than composing on the surface this way. I like to go in and out of the surface instead, layering. I like to see the tracks, like scars on bodies are fascinating to me, and they show like stories about your life. And I feel like when you see how the painting has evolved in a way, you also see the story of how it came to be, and I find that really interesting.
It's like an old year.
So many. And I'm terrible at remembering names. Some of my favorite painters, I don't even remember their names when I need to. I'm like, I don't have my bookshelf to look at. But there's obviously Guston, Susan Rothenberg. I love Kathy Bradford's work. Terry Winters. And thinking about it, there's a lot of those painters that sort of fall between abstract and figurative, that might use figures, but to use them how they want to use them, not like making images of. So that's one of my favorite sayings, like, art is not about making a picture of something, it's about making something visible. That's one of my favorite. Yes?
So you mentioned that you have wanted a
Yeah, the struggle between, sometimes what I wish I could do and what I can do, or what happens when I work. There are definitely some tension there at times. I love so many abstract painters, and I've tried, but I just get stopped. It just becomes abstract to me. I need these figures, obviously, to hang my paint on. And like I said, like accepting that those paintings are what happened when I paint without reference material, that took me some time to be like okay with it, because I'm like, can't they be happier or nicer or something? What has happened lately is people really notice the humor in the paintings a lot more, because I'm like, yeah, they're dark and they're weird, but they're also really kind of dumb looking, right? They're kind of like why would you do that? Like, and then I had a couple of paintings. The one that Jay mentioned at a Teep show in Brooklyn, I had 2 large paintings, and they can appear really dramatic at first view. But then this one woman came in and she's like, these are so funny. And I'm like, thank you for seeing that. Because I do, giggle to myself sometimes, where I'm like, this is so weird. Like, I don't even, I've never seen them before either, So they're new to me when I make them, as to anyone. And I also have to figure out what they're about. All right.
All right, thank you.